The M113 is a fully tracked armored personnel carrier that was developed by Food Machinery Corp. The vehicle was first fielded by the United States Army's mechanized infantry units in Vietnam in April 1962. The M113 was the most widely used armored vehicle of the U.S. Army in the Vietnam War, earning the nickname Green Dragon by the Viet Cong as it was used to break through heavy thickets in the midst of the jungle to attack and overrun enemy positions. It was largely known as an APC or an ACAV by the Allied forces. The M113 introduced new aluminum armor that made the vehicle much lighter than earlier vehicles. It was thick enough to protect the crew and passengers against small arms fire, but light enough that the vehicle was air transportable and moderately amphibious. In the U.S. Army, the M113 series have long been replaced as frontline combat vehicles by the M2 and M3 Bradleys, but large numbers are still used in support roles such as armored ambulance, mortar carrier, engineer vehicle, and command vehicle. The Army's heavy brigade combat teams are equipped with around 6,000 M113s and 4,000 Bradleys. The M113's versatility spawned a wide variety of adaptations that live on worldwide and in U.S. service. These variants together currently represent about half of U.S. Army armored vehicles. To date, it is estimated that over 80,000 M113s of all types have been produced and used by over 50 countries worldwide, making it one of the most widely used armored fighting vehicles of all time. The Military Channel's Top 10 series named the M113 the most significant infantry vehicle in history. The U.S. Army planned to retire the M113 family of vehicles by 2018, seeking replacement with the GCV Infantry Fighting Vehicle program. But now replacement of the M113 has fallen to the Armored Multi-Purpose Vehicle program. Thousands of M113s continue to see combat service in the IDF, although as of 2014, the IDF was seeking to gradually replace many of its vehicles with NAMR APCs. Development. The M113 was developed by Food Machinery Corp, which had produced the earlier M59 and M75 armored personnel carriers. The M113 bears a very strong resemblance to both of these earlier vehicles. The M75 was too heavy and expensive to be useful. Its weight prevented amphibious capability and being transported by air. The lightened M59 addressed both of these problems, but ended up with too little armor, and was unreliable as a result of efforts to reduce its cost. The Army was looking for a vehicle that combined the best features of both designs. The Airborne Armored Multi-Purpose Vehicle family of all-purpose, all-terrain armored fighting vehicles (FMC) had been working with Kaiser Aluminum and Chemical Co. in the late 1950s to develop suitable aluminum armor. It was known that use of this armor could produce a vehicle that provided the protection of the M75 and the lightweight and mobility of the M59. Food Machinery Corp. responded with two proposals, two versions of the aluminum T113, a thicker and a thinner armored one, along with the similar but mostly steel T117, the thicker armored version of the T113. Effectively, the prototype of the M113 was chosen because it weighed less than its steel competitor, while offering the same level of protection. An improved T113 design, the T113E1, was adopted by the U.S. Army in 1960 as the M113. A diesel prototype, T113E2, was put into production in 1964 as the M113A1, and quickly supplanted the gasoline-engined M113. In 1994, FMC transferred the M113's production over to its newly formed defense subsidiary, United Defense. Then in 2005, United Defense was acquired by BAE Systems. The M113 was developed to provide a survivable and reliable light-tracked vehicle able to be airlifted and airdropped by C-130 and C-141 transport planes. The original concept was that the vehicle would be used solely for transportation, bringing the troops forward under armor and then having them dismount for combat. The M113 would then retreat to the rear, entering service with the U.S. Army in 1960. The M113 required only 2 crewmen, a driver and a commander, and carried 11 passengers inside the vehicle. Its main armament was a single 50 caliber M2 Browning machine gun operated by the commander. On the 30th of March 1962, the first batch of 32 M113s arrived in Vietnam, and were sent to 2 Army of the Republic of Vietnam mechanized rifle companies, each equipped with 15 of the APCs. On the 11th of June 1962, the 2 mechanized units were fielded for the first time. During the Battle of Bac in January 1963, at least 14 of the exposed 50 caliber gunners aboard the M113s were killed in action, necessitating modifications to improve crew survivability. Soon, makeshift shields formed from metal salvaged from the hulls of sunken ships were fitted to the carriers, which afforded better protection. But, finding that this material could be penetrated by small arms fire, subsequent shields were constructed from scrapped armored vehicles. The ARVN 80th Ordnance Unit in South Vietnam developed the shield idea further and commenced engineering general issue gun shields for the M113. These shields became the predecessor to the standardized armored cavalry assault vehicle variant and were issued to all ARVN mechanized units. During the early 1960s, the ARVNs had modified the M113s to function as amphibious light tanks, and not as battle taxis as U.S. designers had intended. Instead of an armored personnel carrier, the ARVN used the carried infantry as extra, dismountable soldiers in an oversized tank crew. These ACAV sets were eventually adapted to U.S. Army M113s with the arrival of the Army's conventional forces in 1965. The vehicles continued to operate in the role of a light tank and reconnaissance vehicle, and not as designed in theater. Still, the M113 could carry 11 infantrymen inside, with 2 crewmen operating it. The U.S. Army, after berating the Vietnamese for flouting battle doctrine, came out with their own ACAV version. This more or less standardized ACAV kit included shields and a circular turret for the 50 caliber M2 machine gun in the track commander position, 2 M60 machine guns with shields for the left and right rear positions, and belly armor, steel armor bolted from the front bottom extending 1/2 to 2/3 of the way towards the bottom rear of the M113. The 2 rear machine gunners could fire the weapons while standing inside the rectangular open cargo hatch. This transformed the M113 into a fighting vehicle, but the vehicle still suffered from its lightly armored configuration, having never been designed for such a role. Canada also adopted the ACAV kits when employing the M113A2 during peacekeeping operations in the Balkans in the 1990s. In order to improve the fighting ability of the mounted troops, a number of experiments were carried out in the 1960s under the MICV-65 project, which aimed to develop a true infantry fighting vehicle rather than an armored personnel carrier. Pacific Car and Foundry entered the steel-armored XM701, but this proved to be too slow and too heavy to be airmobile, even in the C-141. Food Machinery Corp. entered the XM734, which was largely the ACAV M113, but whereas the M113 seated the troops facing inward on benches along the walls, the XM734 sat them facing outwards on a central bench. 4 gun ports and vision blocks were added on each side to allow the seated troops to fire even while under cover. Although neither the XM701 or XM734 were deemed worthwhile to produce, FMC continued development of the version as the XM765 Advanced Infantry Fighting Vehicle. The AIFV was sold to a number of third-party users in the 1970s, including the Netherlands, the Philippines and Belgium. Modified versions of the Vietnam War ACAV sets have been deployed to Iraq to equip the standard M113s still in service. The circular, 50-caliber gun shields have been modified, while the rear port and starboard gun stations have been deleted for service in that region. Some of these modified vehicles have been utilized for convoy escort duties. The M113 has relatively light armor, but it can be augmented with add-on steel plates for improved ballistic protection. Also, reactive armor and slat armor can be added for protection against rocket-propelled grenade. Windowed gun shields developed by an armorer in Iraq are reminiscent of ACAV vehicle modifications so effective in Southeast Asia. Band tracks made of rubber are in use by Canadian and other forces to enable stealthy operation, less damage to paved roads, higher speed, less maintenance, access to terrain where operation of wheeled vehicles is impractical, and less vibration and rolling resistance. Most of the 13,000 M113s that are still in U.S. Army service have been upgraded to the A3 variant. The M113 has also been adopted to replace the aging fleet of visually modified M551s being used to simulate Russian-made combat vehicles at the U.S. Army's National Training Center in Fort Irwin, California. These M113s, like the M551s they replaced, have also been modified to resemble enemy tanks and APCs, such as the T-80 and BMP-2. One of the advantages of the M113 being used to simulate the latter is that the infantry squad can now ride inside the simulated BMP instead of in a truck accompanying a tank masquerading as one, as was often the case with the M551s. Nicknames. The M113 has received a variety of nicknames over the years. The South Vietnamese Army called it the Green Dragon. United States troops tended to refer to the M113 simply as a 113 air track or an ACAV. The Israel Defense Forces employed the M113 in many different variants, all designed in Israel, and has given each of them official names. For the baseline, Bardelas to the Nagmash, Nagman, and Kazmin variants for urban combat up to the Zelda and Zelda 2, which are fitted with era suites. The Australian Army refers to its M113A1S as buckets, bush taxis, and modified M113A1S fitted with 76mm turrets as beasts. The German Army has various nicknames, depending on location and branch of service, including Elephant Shoe, Tank Wedge, and Bathtub. In service with the Hellenic Army, M113s have traditionally been referred to as ducklings, most probably due to their amphibious capabilities, while some claim that the M113 has been nicknamed the Gavin. This is not an official designation. One observer said, in more than 30 years working in the defense industry, I have never heard anybody use the name Gavin for the M113. Not in the US nor in any of the many countries that use the vehicle, not in the military forces, not in the companies that build and equip it, not in the groups that retrofit and repair it. This usage appears not only to be unofficial, it is entirely fictional, and I believe that you may have been the victim of a hoax or deliberate disinformation. Design. Armament. The basic M113 armored personnel carrier can be fitted with a number of weapon systems. The most common weapon fit is a single, 50 caliber M2 machine gun. However, the mount can also be fitted with a 40mm Mk19 automatic grenade launcher. A number of anti-tank weapons can be fitted to the standard variant. The U.S.Army developed kits that allowed the M47 Dragon and BGM-71 TOW anti-tank missile systems to be mounted. In the case of the M47, the system mated to the existing machine gun mount, without having to remove the machine gun. This allowed the commander to use both weapons. A large array of turrets and fixed mounts are available to mount high-explosive cannon ranging from 20mm to 105mm onto the M113 series, making them function as assault guns and fire support, while in many cases still having room inside to carry dismounted infantry, cavalry, scouts. Armor. The M113 is built of 5083 aircraft-quality aluminum alloy, which gives it some of the same strength as steel at a slightly reduced weight, as the greater thickness allows structural stiffness. The M113A3 was designed to provide protection against 7.62mm threat, and this proved not to be enough when tested in combat. In comparison, modern APCs like the Striker have an all-around 7.62mm armor-piercing protection, plus 14.5mm protection on the front, sides, and rear. Also, protection against anti-personnel mines through the vehicle floor is installed. Mobility. Its weight allows the use of a relatively small engine to power the vehicle. A Detroit 6V53 V6 two-stroke diesel engine of 318 cubic inches with an Allison TX 100-1 3-speed automatic transmission. This allows the vehicle to carry a large payload cross-country and to be transported by fixed and rotary wing aircraft. Original production M113s can swim without deploying flotation curtains. Using only a front-mounted trim vane, they are propelled in the water by the tracks. Service history. Vietnam. The Vietnam War was the first combat opportunity for mechanized infantry, a technically new type of infantry with its roots in the armored infantry of World War II, now using the M113 armored personnel carrier. In addition, armored cavalry squadrons in Vietnam consisted largely of M113s, after replacing the intended M114 in a variety of roles, and armor battalions contained M113s within the headquarters companies, such as the Maintenance Section, Medical Section, Vehicle Recovery Section, Mortar Section, and the Scout Section. United States Army mechanized infantry units in Vietnam were fully equipped with the M113 APC-ACAV, which consisted of one headquarters company and 3 line companies, normally with an authorized strength of approximately 900 men. 10 U.S. mechanized infantry battalions and 1 mechanized brigade were deployed to Vietnam from 1965 until the departure in 1972. Company D, 16th Armor, 173rd Airborne Brigade was the first U.S. Army armor unit deployed to Vietnam. It originally consisted of 3 platoons of M113s and a platoon of self-propelled anti-tank systems. It was the only independent armor company in the history of the U.S. Army. Upon the company's arrival in Vietnam, a 4th-line platoon was added. This was equipped with M106 4.2-in mortar carriers. The mortar platoon often operated with brigade infantry units to provide indirect fire support. It also deployed at times as a dismounted infantry unit. The remaining Spats platoon was re-equipped with M113s in late 1966 and the mortar platoon was deactivated in early 1967. From early 1967, D. 16th had 3 line platoons equipped with M113s and eventually its diesel version, the M113A1. It also standardized in late 1968 with 3 machine guns per track, 1 M2. 50 caliber and 2 M60 machine guns mounted on each side. After several years, the machine gun array varied considerably from APC to APC. The company conducted search and destroy missions, road and firebase security. 25 D. 16th paratroopers were killed in action and many more were wounded during the course of the war. 16th Division's largest battle took place on the 4th of March 1968 at North Tuy Hoa. During the day, the company lost 5 men killed, 16 wounded, and 3 missing bodies were found. The enemy took a much greater loss. An estimated 2 enemy battalions, 85th Main Force and the 95th NVA Regiment, were rendered ineffective as they had 297 KIAs, with D-16 Armor receiving credit for killing 218. The revised official count for D-16 was 8 KIA and 21 WIA. The company commander, Captain Robert Helmick, was awarded the DSC. Many D-16th soldiers earned awards for valor. 16th Division was awarded a Meritorious Unit Award for its actions in Vietnam. It was deactivated in 1969 and the company's M113s were distributed to E Company, 17th Cavalry, 173rd Airborne Brigade. The M113s were instrumental in conducting reconnaissance in force, search and destroy missions, and large invasions such as the U.S. invasion of Cambodia on the 1st of May 1970 and later Laos in 1971, all of which used the M113 as the primary workhorse for moving the ground armies. While operating with cavalry and armor units, the M113s often worked in conjunction with U.S. M48 Patton and M551 Sheridan tanks. During the Vietnam War, U.S. Army gun trucks, along with V-100 armored cars, conducted convoy escorts for military traffic. The USAF used M113 and M113A1 ACAV vehicles in USAF security police squadrons, which provided air-based ground defense support in Vietnam. Also, M113s were supplied to the ARVN. One notable ARVN unit equipped with the M113 APC, the 3D Armored Cavalry Squadron, earned the Presidential Unit citation. Additional M113s were supplied to the Cambodian Khmer National Armed Forces, equipped with a turret for the machine gun and a recoilless rifle mounted on the roof. The Australian Army also used the M113 in Vietnam, after initial experiences showed that the crew commander was too vulnerable to fire. The Australians tried a number of different gun shields and turrets, eventually standardizing with the Cadillac HT-50 turret fitted with 2 .30 cal Browning machine guns, or a single .30 single 50 combination. Other turrets were tried, as were various gun shields, the main design of which was similar to the gun shield used on the U.S. M113 ACAV version. In addition, the Australians operated an M113 variant fitted with a Saladin armoured car turret with a 76mm gun as a fire support vehicle, or FSV, for infantry fire support. This has now also been removed from service. Subsequent to Vietnam, all Australian M113 troop carriers were fitted with the T-50 turret. The FSV was eventually phased out and replaced with a modernized version known as an MRV. The MRV featured a Scorpion turret with 76mm gun, improved fire control, and passive night vision equipment. Recent history. The current M113 fleet includes a mix of M113A2 and E3 variants and other derivatives equipped with the most recent RISE package. The standard RISE package includes an upgraded propulsion system, greatly improved driver controls, external fuel tanks, and 200-amp alternator with 4 batteries. Additional A3 improvements include the incorporation of spall liners and provision for mounting external armor. The future M113A3 fleet is planned to include a number of vehicles that will have high-speed digital networks and data transfer systems. The M113A3 digitization program includes applying applique hardware, software, and installation kits and hosting them in the M113 FOV. The U.S. Army stopped buying M113s in 2007, with 6,000 vehicles remaining in the inventory. The Israel Defense Forces are the second largest user of the M113 after the United States, with over 6,000 of the vehicles in service. In 1967, some Jordanians' M113 were captured in the West Bank and were integrated into the Israeli Army. In 1970, Israel started to receive the better armored M113A1 to replace the antiquated half-tracks. The IDF M113s were armed with M2HB machine guns, and 2 Mag 7.62mm machine guns on either side of the upper crew compartment door. After the 1973 war, armor and protection were improved. By 1982, almost all the Israeli infantry rode in Zelders. The M113 took part in the Yom Kippur War, in Operation Peace for Galilee, in campaigns in Lebanon, and in the West Bank and Gaza. In October 1973, the LDF was equipped with 448 M113 APCs that saw action in Golan and Sinai. They proved inadequate for direct fighting, due to the poor armor protection. In the Battle of Bakata, most of the 7th Recon Company was wiped out while trying to assault Syrian commandos with their M113s. In 1982, PLO ambushes with RPGs caused extensive casualties, because of the tendency of the M113's aluminum armor to catch on fire after being hit by anti-tank weapons. In some units, men became so frightened that they simply walked next to their M113 a road outside rather than risk being burned to death. By the time of the siege of Beirut, M113s were only used to carry supplies to the front line, always stopping at least 100 meters from enemy lines. The IDF found M113s unsatisfactory for urban warfare because the machine guns lacked sufficient elevation to use against upper stories of building. Vulnerability of crew members serving machine guns to sniper fire and difficulty to move in narrow roads and alleys of cities and refugee camps. The Israel Defense Forces still operates large numbers of the M113 in its combat missions, from its total fleet of 6,000 of the vehicles. On numerous occasions since their introduction in the late 1960s, the IDF's M113s have proven and vulnerable to modern anti-tank missiles, IEDs, and RPGs, resulting in the deaths of many Israeli soldiers riding inside the vehicles. The IDF has nonetheless been unable to replace the use of them in combat operations, due to budget constraints in equipping its large mechanized infantry regiments. In 2004, 2 fully laden IDF M113s were destroyed by IEDs, resulting in the deaths of 11 soldiers, all those inside the vehicles on both occasions. The vulnerability of the M113 armored personnel carrier to IEDs and RPGs led the IDF to later begin to develop the M113. In 2014, during the first wave of the IDF's ground incursion into Gaza during Operation Protective Edge, a Hamas RPG-29 destroyed a fully loaded M113 in Gaza, resulting in the deaths of the 7 Golani Brigade soldiers riding inside the vehicle. As a result, the IDF faced calls from the Israeli public to build more M113s over the next decade and to gradually reduce the number of M113s used in its future combat operations. Israel is also prototyping the Eitan, an 8-wheeled armored fighting vehicle to replace their M113s. Designed to serve alongside the tracked Neymar, the Eitan is planned to be cheaper and lighter, at 35 tons, incorporating an active protection system and a turret. Field demonstrations are expected by late 2016, with initial serial production expected to begin by 2020. However, due to the slow rate of production of replacement APCs, the IDF is expected to be dependent on the M113 well into the 2020s. Law enforcement. Some M113s have been adopted by some law enforcement agencies. Photos show an M113 marked Midland County Sheriff was used in the 2008 raid of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints compound. The Osceola County Sheriff's Office also uses one for its SWAT team. The Brazilian Marine Corps's M113s were used in joint operations with Batalhão Operações Policiais Especiais during the 2010 raid on Complexo do Maio. Replacement. It was the U.S. Army's intention that the BCT ground combat vehicle program replace the M113 by 2018, with the GCV infantry fighting vehicle meanwhile displacing the other vehicles into task-specific roles of the M113. Vehicles displaced into specific roles of the M113 would then be replaced entirely by future variants of the GCV. The M113 will now be replaced by the Armored Multi-Purpose Vehicle Program. Some 2,897 vehicles in 5 mission roles are set to take its place at the brigade level and below within armored brigades. However, the AMPV program is not developing a vehicle to replace the M113 in supporting echelons above brigade level, which will have different requirements. BAE Systems submitted a version of the Bradley fighting vehicle for the AMPV, while General Dynamics has offered the Striker for filling the M113's roles in rear echelon units outside of armored brigades removed from frontline fighting, and Navistar Defense has offered an upgraded version of the Max Pro MRAP for units above brigade level as well. The AMPVs are to be produced at a rate of around 180 vehicles per year, enough to equip 13 armored brigades. With 12 brigades to modernize, the M113 is not planned to be entirely replaced in armored brigades until the late 2020s. With studies on what vehicle to replace M113s within rear echelon units ongoing, the M113 is not likely to be phased out of U.S. Army service until after 2030, over 70 years after entering service.